Welcome to episode 56 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning speaking to you here from my hobbit hole in semi-rural southeast London. We're just back from a lovely family holiday. A holiday for us, and like many I'm sure, was 3 years in the making. A great time was had by all. But that, along with a couple of big jobs that I was working on away from home, is the reason why this month's episodes are later than usual. I'm also aware that I still owe you an episode for June 2022, so I'll try and sneak that in the coming month. So 1 month we'll have 3 episodes. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, and once you've listened to this episode, please do go back and check through the 55 episodes that came before it. I've been so lucky in getting some wonderful guests, including directors, sound designers, documentarians, all sorts of people. If you're a regular listener, thanks for joining me again. And if you support the podcast, this very independent podcast, it is just me and my laptop and a guest, then huge thanks for your continued championing of this little podcast. It really means a lot to me, and I genuinely couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning, JamieBenning. And depending on the tier you choose, you could well receive some lovely Filmumentaries merch. Don't forget, you can also find me on the Filmumentaries Facebook page, at JamieSWB on Twitter, and on the Filmumentaries Instagram account. I do sort of tend to post different things in different places, so do keep abreast of those. This episode, I spoke to Gino Acevedo, a makeup and special effects expert that's worked on films like Lord of the Rings, King Kong, Iron Man 3, The Jungle Book, the recent Planet of the Apes movies, and most recently with Jim Cameron on the new Avatar films. Gino was drawn away from a career in LA by Peter Jackson some 15 years ago, and has remained in New Zealand ever since. I spoke to him this month, August 2022, from his home there, and we had a great chat about his entry into the business and some of the amazing films he's worked on. He's kind of seen the transition from physical prosthetics and puppeteering through to the digital side of things. So he's got a really interesting perspective on all of that. And he's just a really nice, enthusiastic guy, great to talk to. So without further delay, here's my chat with Gino, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Most of the people I've spoken to for my podcast, they've had a kind of moment looking back. They realised they had this moment where they fell in love with whatever it is that they ended up doing, their craft. What was that moment for you, Gino, and how old were you?
Boy, I guess that goes way back, to my childhood. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, in the States, obviously. Um, but for me, I guess I was always fascinated with animals, but also fascinated with monster movies. Ever since I can remember, being able to watch them. I think my dad was the one who started watching them, and of course, mom didn't want me to watch them, but dad's like, come here, watch this. But back then it was, the classics of, the old Universal monsters, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is always one of my favorites. But and also my dad was a bit of an artist, not a huge one or anything, but he used to just do a lot of sketching and just to have a bit of play. And I just kind of used to kind of emulate him, and he taught me a few things. So I think I used to sit in front of the TV and, try to draw the monsters and things. And but I'll never forget one time when I was in grade school, probably fourth or fifth grade or something like that. And I always loved art class. I failed miserably in all the other subjects, but in art I wasn't too bad. And but they had a teacher conference, with all the students and stuff, and then parents, come and meet the teachers, and they talk about what their students have been doing. And I remember my parents went to go to my art class. I was really excited to go show them the stuff I've been working on, and the teacher's name was Mrs. Freeman. Bless her. And they said, says, oh, she talk like this, hello. And she said, it says, and this is the work that all the students have been doing, this and this and this, beautiful sceneries, mountains and butterflies. And then there's Gino. Okay, so then she didn't even have my stuff up. She pulled it out from a drawer. and it had the creature from the Black Lagoon and monsters and creatures with fangs and dripping blood and all that kind of stuff. But I loved it, and it was great because mom and dad gave me a big pat on the back. Says, "This is great. This is wonderful." I said, "This is wonderful, Mrs. Freeman," and she goes, "Well, okay, well." But even beyond that, it's like growing up in Phoenix, there used to be a show on Saturday mornings at 10:30, from 10:30 to 12, and it was called The World Beyond. And this show, they showed and showcased all the great famous monster movies, as well as Godzilla and all that kind of stuff. And so every Saturday morning from 10:30 to 12, I was there in front of the TV, glued in front of it, and all my friends used to come over. Well, my friends knew they could either come in to watch it with me, but they knew that they weren't going to be able to get me out to go play yet, until after it was done. And I think my first magazine that I got that was monster oriented was from a magazine called it wasn't Famous Monsters, it was called Monster World, I think. And I'll never forget, I was grocery shopping with my mom, and we were going through the checkout lane, and how they have all the magazines and stuff there. And this one just caught my eye. I swear, it sang out to me, and it had a picture of a creature called the Reptile, from a movie called The Reptile, and it was this a beautiful makeup done by Roy Ashton, I think it was. And I just had to have it. It had his big buggy eyes, and he had fangs and everything. I said, Mom, please. And she goes, "Oh my God, no, that's horrible. Put that back. I said, "Oh, Mom, please, let me have it." And I think I promised, I asked her, I told her, I said, "Look, I'll do anything. And Mom was great. She gave in, and she bought it for me. But I remember sitting in the back seat of the car, looking through it page by page, and it had articles, and it had pictures of behind the scenes of some of these movies and stuff, which I found really fascinating. And I love looking at those pictures and seeing the stuff behind them, see the stuff that was on the walls and things like that. I found it so fascinating.
So was that the real first kind of time you'd realized that these were made in a way? Had this show on TV kind of just shown the films but hadn't shown behind the scenes?
Exactly.
And then the magazine sort of took you into that separate world.
It was that, and then it was the movie that really made me want to get into the special makeup effects, like so many of us, was that was the original Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
And because I always had this fascination with apes. I love apes. I'll show you some pictures. I'll send you some pictures of all my collection of ape stuff.
Cool.
But I'll never forget, on TV one time there was a documentary of the making of Planet of the Apes, and it showcased this gentleman by the name of John Chambers, who of course invented the whole look of the apes. And I'm not sure if he invented the material foam rubber or not, but he used foam rubber. But that whole look and everything just kind of revolutionized the whole look of makeup effects, and they were so realistic, and these talking apes, and it just blew my head as a kid. And so I was glued to the TV and always watching it, and because then they had a TV series for quite a while after that.
Yeah, that's
and I remember sitting in front of the TV with my friend Dwayne Guarneri, who was just as much of an ape fanatic, and we used to have some clay, and we used to model little heads of the apes and stuff while we were watching Planet of the Apes on TV. Nice. And then of course came the sad day when they said that they were going to take it off the air, and we wrote to them. Well, actually, it was Dwayne's mom helped us write this letter, and I think it was to CBS or NBC or something in the States. And we were just saying how big of fans we were, and we sent them pictures of the sculptures we did, and we said, please don't take this off the air. We need this, and we got a reply back. And he says, thank you so much for being our loyal fans and supporting us. He says, but sadly, because of the viewings the lack of viewings rather, we're gonna have to go off the air. And it was like, no. But
it's funny you share that story really with Dave Barkley, who I interviewed, who's one of the puppeteers on Yoda and Jabba the Hutt. He was one of the guys in Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, right. Okay.
He fell in love with Planet of the Apes, and he ended up writing to Stuart Freeborn and begging for a job aged 18 or 19, and that's how he got into the industry. So Planet of the Apes is definitely it's like the gateway drug of the makeup artists, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
I've even made up my daughter Ruby as one of the ape characters
Nice.
a long time ago, and it was hysterical, And I used to at Weta Digital, they would have a Halloween party, for all the people there every year,
Mm.
and so I'd always make her up as something, And this particular time as the ape, it's probably my favorite one, that we did. And so we're walking around, and she is, as she was probably maybe 10 years old, something like that. And she goes, Dad, everybody's looking at me. I said, that's the whole point. It's like, yeah, that's great.
We won.
And then all the other dads, who had their kids dressed up in a cardboard box as a robot,
Yeah,
covered in
yeah.
aluminum foil or something. Yeah, thanks, Gino. Thanks. Yeah.
So when did you make the leap then from loving this stuff to actually getting your hands on and working with prosthetics?
It was probably the golden door for me that opened up was there was a Halloween company in Phoenix, and because Halloween is such a huge thing in the in the States,
Yeah, massive.
But what had happened a little bit prior to that is that in seventh and eighth grade, again, I always loving animals, and I had my favorite science teacher, Francis Reinprecht, would always bring in lots of snakes and lizards and all sorts of stuff, and I would take care of them all, because I loved them so much. And even after I went off into high school, I would still come back and help take care of the animals and stuff. And probably about my senior year, Francis said, he says, I've just had a student teacher start with me, and her name's Patricia Liff. And she just married this guy by the name of Larry Liff. And Larry owns this Halloween company in Phoenix called Imagineering. And I said, wow. And I kind of knew the name, but the thing that was really cool about it was is that Imagineering made this stuff called vampire blood. Can I grab something real
Yeah,
quick?
sure, go for it. Yeah.
Hang on one second. I got it right here. So Larry owned this company called Imagineering and made this stuff called vampire blood.
And you still have a tube of it right there.
I still have
Wow.
two of it, and this stuff was great. This is the only stuff that we could really get in the stores as a kid. And then check out these instructions and
Oh,
stuff on the
wow.
back. It was
Oh, I
great.
love that. So retro.
But and yeah, and he even made this thing called the oozing orb.
What is
Um,
that?
and anyways, Francis told Patricia about me. He said one of my ex students was really artsy and really into monsters and stuff. And and you said that your husband owns a Halloween company. He's going to be graduating from high school pretty soon. Maybe he can put together a portfolio, and maybe you can get him an interview. And she said, yeah, I can do that. So I did that. I put together a portfolio after I graduated, and I didn't do any sculpting or anything like that. I
Right.
just did a lot of drawings. So it was, lots of monsters and Dungeons and Dragons and all that kind of stuff. So I went to go meet Larry, and he says, oh well, he said, you got some skills and stuff. I said, eventually I want to get into making some latex masks, some Halloween masks. He said, but that's not going to be for probably another 6 months or so. So he said, so unfortunately right now I really don't have any positions for you. I said, he said, the only thing I've really got is to work out on the floor, and making all the product and stuff like that. He said, but I don't think you're going to want to do that. It's pretty monotonous, and you'd hate it, And but he gave me a tour, and I'll never forget going through the hallway, and these doors opened up, to the factory, and it was Halloween Town. It's like they had machines making all this stuff, and it was just like, oh my
Heaven for
God, this
you.
is amazing. Yeah, totally. And they were making all sorts of things, and he says, but this is the guys, they start early in the morning here and they finish, late afternoon. But as I said, I don't think you'd want to do it. I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. So he said, well, okay, well, if you want a job, I'll, pay his minimum wage and see how you do. So I did that. I started, making the vampire blood and and putting the oozing orb in containers and things like that. And I did that for close to 6 months, and every now and then I'd see Larry walk through the factory, and I'd go, hey, Larry. And he'd go like, oh, he's still here.
This kid's still here. So you're about
Yeah.
18 at this time, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of had a fairly good idea of what you wanted to do and what you wanted to be involved with. Maybe not the end game yet, but you kind of had a sense, this is my world and I want to be
I
in this
did.
world.
Yeah. I wanted to do something. And and something with makeup. I played around a little bit with makeup,
Mm,
just with the supplies and stuff that I could get,
mm,
and but not really knowing or understanding the whole process and everything.
mm.
But so it wasn't really till I started there. And but anyways, Larry came out one day after the close to 6 months. He says, "Well, you're still here, so I guess it must be that you're pretty dedicated." I said, "So," says, "Come on off the line." I said, "I'm going to set you up in this little room." So he gave me my own little room, my own little laboratory, and he said, let's this, I'll give you some clay and stuff, and maybe you can start playing around. And so it was just like, oh crap, I have to teach myself how to sculpt. And of course, I couldn't get the YouTube or anything because we didn't have that back then. But I did have some books, and he even had some books because he actually used to do a bit of makeup himself. And so we had some books like, the great Richard Corson books, theatrical makeup and things like that. So I used to practice a lot, sometimes on myself, but I'd usually get my friends as guinea pigs. And I would just keep practicing and taught myself how to sculpt. But also through that company, I met a gentleman by the name of Barry Coper, and Barry and Larry were friends. But Barry was a really well established makeup artist in Los Angeles. In fact, at this time, he was the head of the makeup at CBS Studios in Television City in Los Angeles. And what Barry would do is that Barry would design a lot of these makeup kits, and he'd come over to Phoenix once a year to apply the makeups, all the new makeups and stuff, and they would have a big photo shoot for the catalog. And so that's how I met Barry the first time. And I think we just hit it off right away. But I think he saw a lot of myself and him when he was growing up.
Yeah.
Young and eager and anxious to learn, and so he kind of took me under his wing. But the really ironic thing about this is that Barry was taught by John Chambers.
Oh, wow.
How spooky is
So
that?
the lineage goes all the way through. That's
Oh,
great.
totally. It's so bizarre. Yeah, yeah. So he would tell me stories about John. At this time, John was still alive. And years later, Barry introduced me to John, so I actually got to meet the man, which was just really incredible. But anyways, I'd fly out to LA and go stay with Barry for a weekend. And Barry would introduce me to Rick Baker, to Stan Winston, and to David Miller, and all these guys.
Yeah.
And I'd go around and see the different shops and stuff. And it was just like, oh my God. And Barry said, yeah, you got to come out here and, keep practicing, build up a good portfolio. And one of these days come out here and, work with these guys. And it was just like, oh, it'd be amazing. But anyways, I went back to Phoenix, and so it wasn't until a few years later that Barry kept egging me on. He says, "Come on, move out to LA." I said, "No, I'm not ready yet." I said, "Those guys are way too good. I still suck. I need to practice more." He says, "Come on out, you'll be fine." I said, "No, no, no." But then one time he called and he said, I said, "I've got you a little gig." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, over at NBC Studios, his friend who was the head of makeup department there, Bob Scribner, said that he was getting ready to do a show in a few weeks, and it was with Dick Clark. Have you heard of Dick Clark before?
Yeah, yeah. I do know Dick Clark. Yeah.
There was a show in America called American Bandstand.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And things like that. He was like a radio announcer.
Yes. Yeah.
And but he said it was a Dick Clark show, but they were going to, one of the segments they were going to do was a thing called Masquerade. And basically it was a takeoff from an old show they used to do back in the 60s, where they would have celebrities made up as other celebrities. Right. And it was like an audience participation where through questions, the audience had to guess who they were. And so they were going to do one of the skits of this little thing they were going to do. And I had to make up Alan Hale and Bob Denver from the Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I absolutely loved. And it was really the first time that I was, got to meet some real actors, and I was just totally starstruck with these guys. And the tricky thing was I had to turn Alan Hale into W.C. Fields, which wasn't too hard, because he's got a great face for that. And then, but the challenge was Bob Denver had to turn him into Mae West, because they did a little skit from a movie called My Little Chickadee, from way back. And so anyways, they came in, and so I had to take their life casts, and then I sculpted the pieces, made the molds, ran the foam and everything, and applied the makeups, for the show. And it was my first big thing. It was so incredible.
And under time pressure as well, I would imagine, in being
totally,
TV,
absolutely,
quick turnaround.
Yeah. And so after that, well, actually, what I took a leave of absence, from Imagineering, the Halloween company. Of course, Larry was just, oh yeah, take as much time as you want, and that's the other thing, is that Larry was always trying to push me out the door. Says, you need to go. And I was like, no, 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 no. I like it here. I like my little cubby hole laboratory and everything, and making masks and things. And anyways, I had about a week left before I had to come back. And one of the gentlemen that Barry had introduced me to was David Miller. And David Miller, who did the original Nightmare on Elm Street, the Freddy Krueger makeup.
Yeah.
And he's done Night of the Comet and Night of the Creeps, which was just on TV the other night, actually. And so by this time, David was working on part 5 of Nightmare on Elm Street, called The Dream Child. And so I would go into the shop and see all the stuff they were making. And Dave said, so you got a week left. He said, do you want to come work with me in the shop? And it's like, yeah. And I said, you can help me, sculpt, Freddy's makeup and stuff. It's like, wow. So cool. I did that. And I was going to stay a bit longer, but then what had happened is that, and one of the reasons really why I didn't move to LA earlier was because my mom was quite ill. She had cancer, and I was always worried that something was going to happen to her, while I was there. And Mom was great, and she was always saying, just go. It's like, if something's going to happen to me, it's going to happen while I'm here, while you're there, whatever. And so, but it turns out that my last week that I was there in LA is she passed away. Yeah. So I was very sad. I was very upset, obviously. But it was at that time that I kind of realized that there wasn't really anything holding me back in Phoenix anymore. So, I talked to Barry, and Barry said, and Barry talked to Dave Miller, and Dave said, look, come back out here. I can use you. We'll do this show, and I've got some other stuff coming up and all that. So that's when I made the big move and the transition to Hollywood. But also I was still able to work for Larry, because Larry still gave me all the masks and stuff to do. So I would do all the sculptings and stuff in LA, mold everything, and send him back the mold masters and things like that. So it worked. Cool. It worked out really well.
It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of the people I've spoken to have had these kind of mentors, whether they're sort of knowing you, whether you knew they were a mentor at the time or not, you look back and realize that's the person that was putting a hand in your back, kind of shoving you forward and encouraging you. And without those people, we don't kind of go out of our comfort zone, do we, to kind of challenge ourselves, because sometimes we're a bit reluctant to kind of step out into that new world. But it's great to have had somebody like that, because look at what's happened since then. I mean, you've been involved in. You look at your list of movies on IMDb, and it's kind of mind-boggling the amount of huge films you've been involved with, and the work that you've done. Just seeing how it's developed over the decades as well. I mean, I guess one of the first times I became aware of you and your work was probably Lord of the Rings. But if we go back to like Alien 3, I mean, what I've got so many questions in a way, because Alien, of course, is just this huge movie, and it certainly changed the way a lot of us kind of looked at movies in terms of how you could make a movie, in such a small set with just a few characters, and just have this wonderful makeup and effects work, used sparingly, of course. But then we go to Aliens, and we've got Jim Cameron, going all out, guns blazing. By the time we get to Alien 3, what do we do? Where do we go? I'm sure the filmmakers were thinking. And you had David Fincher there, a very young director, very driven director, a very talented director as well. But that film, for you, must have been an amazing opportunity. I mean, it must have blown your mind to realize you were working on an Alien movie. I mean, just to be in that world.
Incredible. Yeah. I mean, I'll never forget the day that, that Alec and Tom, who ran a company called Amalgamated Dynamics, ADI, and I was working for those guys. This is after I finished up with Dave Miller. We did a couple shows with Dave, and then I think from then I must have I met a guy who was working for Dave. His name was Mitch Coughlin, and Mitch had started working for these guys, Alec and Tom, and they were working on a movie called Tremors.
Yes.
And which is a great one, and they were about to finish that up, and I told Mitch, I said, well, I'm going to be looking for some work. He says, well, why don't you bring your portfolio over to Alec and Tom? They've got another show coming up. So I went over there and met those guys, and we just hit it off right away. They're fantastic guys. And the show that they had coming up was Point Break with Patrick Swayze. And they kind of hired me on the spot just because of my background of making masks, because we had to make the president masks. And so I sculpted the Jimmy Carter mask. So that was my claim to fame there.
Excellent.
And then we had a few other artists, Linda Frobos and Ken and Yuri sculpt the other masks and stuff. So I kind of helped, I told them the best ways that as far as like production, the best ways to mold these and to cast them, just because we had to do, multiple runs of these things. And so, and it was towards the end of that show, they got the call for Alien 3. And I think that was handed down from Stan Winston. So I think they went to Stan first, and Stan was busy working on something. It might have been even Jurassic Park. I can't remember.
Yeah, could have been. Yeah, yeah.
Was it?
Could have
Because
been.
this was this is 89, 1990,
well, I
I think
guess
it was.
Jurassic kind of got up and running 1991, maybe, yeah, for a 93 release. So it could well have been early days, yeah.
Early, yeah, yeah. And so Stan said that he says, well, you should, contact Alec and Tom, because Alec and Tom used to work at Stan's, and it was part of his main crew. And so I'll never forget the time when Alec, said, "Look, we're going to be working on Alien 3." I said, "Wow, an Alien movie!" And didn't even think that they would even ask me. It's like, and they were going to take Yuri Everson, who had been working with them for a while, as a shop foreman. And then Alec and Tom, would you be interested in coming out? It's just like, pick me up off the floor. I said, to work on an Alien film, because I'm a huge H.R. Giger fan and fanatic.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
And so
I'm sure you would have been aware of his work pre-Alien as well, right?
Absolutely. I knew of his stuff even back in high school, because it was my art teacher that brought in the Necronomicon book, and just, saw all these phallic symbols and all this. I thought, wow, this is pretty wild stuff. And the stuff was it was so unique and so different. Like, he's never seen anything like that, before. Yeah, so that, and went out to work on the Alien 3 stuff. At the time, it was going to be a New Zealand director was going to direct it, and something happened along the way. It happened like in midair. By the time we were flying in the air to go to London, he was replaced by David Fincher. And so we landed, and we told the news and everything. It's like, David Fincher. At this time, David's claim to fame was he directed the Vogue Madonna videos.
Yes.
Yeah. And so he was real hot at the moment. And it's like, oh, but a guy who's directed the Madonna videos is gonna do an Alien movie. And it's like, okay. So we met David, super nice guy, and just, he was so young, and Alec and Tom started designing, and of course Giger was involved at the time as well. And but Giger was pretty pissed off about something, why they didn't come to him directly first or something. I don't know actually the whole story, but anyways, he refused to come down to the studios, which is like, damn. So I really wanted to meet him. But he would send over, back in those days, he would send over faxes with his pen and ink sketches and stuff like that. Right. And so this machine could, and we'd all sit around this thing and watch this thing come to life. This original Giger sketch.
Wow.
That was faxed. But we had a great crew, because we were only allowed to take over, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we were allowed to take over 5 of us, Americans, to go over there, and the rest of the crew had to be English.
Right, because this was at Pinewood.
Yeah. And so, we went to Pinewood, and of course the huge 007 stage was there, and they still had the whole huge part of the set from Batman was still there.
Oh, really?
Which was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, that was pretty colossal set, that, wasn't it? And they kind of built half
massive. It was the whole Gotham City street and everything like that. Yeah. But it's really cool to be there, just to really, to understand the history of Pinewood. The films that have been there, obviously with 007, but all the other films that have been there too. Legend, as well. When it burned down. Yeah, but anyways, I could babble on about it, but it was an incredible experience to be part of an Alien film, and to be able to paint, the Alien stuff. And I designed the paint schemes for the Alien stuff, along with Yuri Everson. Yuri and I did all that stuff, so it was so cool.
That film kind of had a real kind of amalgamation of different methods of producing those effects. I mean, some of that puppeteering was kind of neat as well, but I guess there was a difficulty then in kind of gelling all those different kind of concepts and those different methods together. I mean, I actually still like Alien 3. I didn't know for years that people didn't like Alien 3. I always quite
Mm,
enjoyed it. I liked
yeah,
that it was completely different and it wasn't trying to redo the original two movies, and that it was a completely out there concept. And of course, the early concepts were even more out there. But yeah, I don't really have
yeah.
a problem with Alien 3. There's a few little bits in it that kind of niggle, but yeah, I like it. I think, it's of its time, and, it started off this amazing career for David Fincher, and great to see some of the effects work in as well. What were the British crews like to work with, just from a kind of, British point of view here?
Well, I have to say nice things, don't I?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
No, they're amazing. I mean, one of the guys that Alec and Tom had brought hired again was Steve Norrington. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know or heard of Steve
Yeah, I do.
Norrington?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Amazing effects guy, artist, and director.
Mm-hmm.
Directed the first Blade movie,
Yeah.
and other things. But Steven had worked with him on Aliens,
Mm.
and as doing some mechanical work and sculpting. And what was interesting about the English guys is that they're so well rounded, that they're able to to draw, design, sculpt, mold, cast, paint, puppeteer, do all sorts of things like that. So and back in the States, I think it's more, you get kind of kind of pigeonholed in a bit, but you just
Sure.
focus on one particular kind of craft.
Mm, mm,
um, and so across from our studio inside Pinewood was Bob Keene's studio
mm,
called Image Animation. And and of course I've heard of Bob Keene and
mm.
all the films that they had done, Nightbreed,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
all sorts of classics like that. And Bob was hysterical. He cracked me up. He reminded me of like a Dom DeLuise character. And he would be like, going, "Oh, hello, mate. Hello." He was wonderful. Loved them. And so we would always go over there and take tours of their shop, which was a great shop, and they just had tons of stuff everywhere. And we'd hired, a few of his people as well, to come on board to join
Mm.
us. But we had Neil Scanlon, Paul Catling, and just tons of guys who are doing amazing stuff now, who've really branched out and just own their own companies and
Yeah,
things.
yeah. It seems like you guys kind of have to really kind of sit in that space between artist and scientist. You not only can you draw and sculpt, but you kind of have to understand materials, the sculpt, the process of casting and everything else. It's it's amazing that people can exist in those two worlds for me. I know people, when I was at school, they were really good at drawing, but they couldn't tie their shoelaces, or they were really good at
Yeah,
science, but couldn't talk to a
yeah.
girl, It's like, but the people in your part of the industry just seem to so multi-skilled. It kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, and it really helps. And I do a lot of talks to kids and students and things,
Mm,
and tell them, I said, look, it's really important to be well-rounded, and to
mm,
to be a sponge and just absorb everything. And I always tell them, I said, the best thing to do is that when you go out for a walk and stuff, is just totally be aware of your environment, and look at things and totally understand. Like when you look at like a concrete wall, and I said, okay, yeah, it's a concrete wall. I said, yeah, but look at this. Look at the way that the cracks are going. Why are they going that way? Or why is there rust on concrete? And well, because there's a metal rod or something sticking out to there, and so the rust is dripping down from that rod. Whereas I've seen a lot of texture artists, where they tend to what we call bomb on the textures and stuff. So they'll put rust all over everything, but there's no real thought process behind it. It's like, why is that rust there? That wouldn't be there.
mm.
So
It's interesting, those little subtle things that help us buy or not buy an
hmm,
effect, isn't it? Whether it's a prosthetic or whether it's a CGI landscape or anything else. We're quite canny, aren't we? Even subconsciously, we either buy into something or don't, and that's the real kind of testament to your skill. Making a prosthetic look real. I mean, I think of
yeah,
something like Death Becomes Her, which isn't in the sort of fantasy horror realm. It's more of a sort of, we're in a more of a grounded reality, I guess. Working with actresses, who everybody knows what they look like exactly because they've seen them in a dozen movies. Um, Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn. I mean, that must have been a huge challenge as well.
it was a huge challenge from a standpoint of as you say, doing human likenesses is of course the biggest challenge. I think it'll be the biggest challenge that anybody can ever do. and with makeups, or even doing a puppet or something. And it was a huge challenge to do the puppets of Meryl Streep, at the time. And this is about the time that CG was starting to raise its head and to start to come into play. And so we worked a lot with ILM, who did a lot of the digital, did some really beautiful digital stuff there. And it was a great blend of the two, of a practical and digital,
Yeah, it
at
was.
that time. But again, going back to trying to make a puppet look realistic and look like the actual character is such a huge challenge. And as you said, so much of it is subconscious, and we have to do this even with makeups and things. And one of the things that I had to do on with the Meryl puppet is because I had to match the look of Meryl's skin, texture and color and everything, to Meryl, who was wearing a lot of makeup and everything. And so her skin was just flawless, which is just boring for me. So it's and that much more of a challenge, because if you have just this kind of blank canvas and don't put detail on it, it's going to look fake, even though the real Meryl is like that, but you just
Yeah.
know that she's real. So but what I had to do, and this was just a subconscious thing, is that I had to realize that I had to go in and paint very subtle little freckles and little breakup kind of things on her skin. Because my thinking is that, when a person sees a slight vein or a freckle or something like that, right away your mind goes to, well, that's skin.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things, like if it wasn't there, you'd pick up on it right away, and it would just look wrong. And that's and even going back to the times on Lord of the Rings, and some of those makeups, the very subtle things, like the noses, like Christopher Lee's nose or Ian McKellen's nose. They're sculpted by this amazing artist out here, Mike Asquith, and did this beautiful job. But a lot of people didn't realize that Ian McKellen was wearing a fake nose. And a lot of people said, well, why is he wearing a fake nose? He wasn't intended to wear a nose, because it wasn't until Peter King had this beautiful wig and beard and everything, who put all that on Ian. But it's kind of the center of his face, being the nose, everything just kind of diminished a bit.
Right.
And so Peter and Fran and Philippa, they realized that we need to do something to enhance that a bit. So it was a very subtle nose piece, that covered his whole nose. And I did the first test makeups on that, and it was credit to Mike for sculpting such a beautiful piece, and it just blended beautifully. And then I colored it, and you couldn't tell. And it's one of those things where you don't want people to know that he's wearing a fake nose, because if they do,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you failed.
But
So,
you
but at
kind
the
of want to
same time,
go,
it's like,
I did that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. uh, so yeah, so it is a very interesting challenge of doing the human stuff, which is probably one of my favorite things to do. I mean, as
Mm.
much as I love creatures and characters like that, but doing the human is definitely the most challenging.
What was the movie that kind of, where you kind of felt the creep of CGI, kind of not just sitting alongside your work and complementing your work, but kind of overlapping and potentially replacing your work?
Yeah, it was probably Species, for me, that I really noticed. And working over with Steve Johnson's company XFX, and again, getting to work with Giger again, because he designed the Sill character. And but we did this incredible puppet that I painted with my friend Norman Cabrera, who did a lot of the sculpting on it. And it was just a beautiful puppet, because it was all very translucent. It was all like clear vacuform, but we painted it on both sides just to give it a lot of depth and everything. And again, it's just a beautiful puppet. And when we saw the film, I guess I don't think I really realized that there was going to be, a CG puppet and towards the end. And and when we saw that, it was like, what the hell? It's like, oh no. It was just, again, it was one of those things where it's always the curse with a lot of CG stuff, where they don't have enough weight to the character. when it's stepping or it's holding or it's grabbing and just things of jiggling skin and all that kind of stuff. It just didn't have it. It just looked like light as a feather and just jumped and just moved so freely and just wasn't right.
And some interesting
Um,
shot choices there as well. Like there's that all that stuff where it comes up to the camera and
oh, that yeah, no,
it
it was
kind of
like no,
yeah,
they could
it
have used our puppet for
just
that,
because you can do it, it's like the Jeff Goldblum line in Jurassic Park, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, or whatever the line
Oh,
is,
exactly.
you didn't stop
Yeah,
to
yeah,
think, should we? Um,
yeah.
yeah, I often find that with that kind of earlier CGI, like you say, it just has this kind of it takes you out of it instantly. And again, it's not even a conscious thing all the time. You just kind of go, it just looks phony because there's no weight to it. At least with puppeteering and prosthetics and costumes and things, you've got
Yeah.
that kind of. We understand the effects of gravity, don't we?
It's there, yeah.
Yeah,
And it wasn't until that that it started to really get perfected. And I'll just ring our bell that doing the Planet of the Apes stuff, the remakes of that.
yeah,
And just
that was incredible.
because obviously technology had come in leaps and bounds by then. And what's interesting is even watching the films now, from the first film to War for the Apes, and
Mm.
just the skin quality and the fur and the eyes, especially. The eyes are the things that you always really look at first, and it's just mind-boggling. I mean, the team at What a Digital is just, there's some really clever people there. It's pretty amazing, and just the stuff that they can come up with.
Yeah, I watched all of those movies, and that last one in particular, I just kind of spent that first 5 minutes just kind of going, wow. And then the
Yeah,
rest of the time I was in the movie,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
buy it and you're in.
exactly. You totally forget that he's that it's Andy Serkis,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
even with the orangutan, which I loved as well. Just
yeah, yeah, that
beautiful
was
stuff.
great. Yeah.
Wow.
So let's just go back briefly then. So you're now entrenched firmly in Hollywood. You're working on all these big movies, Death Becomes Her, which we mentioned, Wolf, Men in
Mm.
Black, Independence Day, Godzilla. Um, how
Nutty
were you?
Professor.
Yeah, how were you tempted away from LA to go over to Weta then?
Well, what had happened is working over at a company called K&B Effects, which was owned by Howard Berger, Bob Kurtzman, and Greg Nicotero, which is where you get the K&B from. And Howard had called me and he said, we've got this film called Spawn, and I'd love for you to come and sculpt the suit. And I said, Howard, this is Gino. It's like I specialize in painting. I never really considered myself, much of a sculptor. I can kind of hold my own, but there's better people out there that can do it. He says, no, no, no. I says, I want you to come. I want you to sculpt it. I know you can do it. And it's like, oh shit, Howard, that's a pretty big task. I said, let me think about it. He says, no, you're not going to think about it. You're going to do it. So I said, okay. So I went and did it. And so it was myself and my friend Bill Zahn, another very talented sculptor, and we sculpted the Spawn suit. And anyways, we were working on Spawn, and Howard one day said that he said, "Hey, I've got these friends that are coming from this place called New Zealand, and they Richard Taylor and his wife Tanya Roger, and they own a company called Weta." In New Zealand, and at the time they did all the special effects to Hercules and Xena, that TV show,
Oh yeah, I
and it
remember
was
that.
like,
Yeah.
I says, "Oh yeah, I remember that show." I said, "I love that stuff." Um, and he said, "Well, they're coming out because they want to recruit people to take them back to New Zealand to work on a remake of King Kong." And I said, King Kong, and he says, yeah, yeah, they're going to remake it. I said, well, who's directing that? And they said, well, Peter Jackson. It's like, who? It's like, sorry, Peter. But in fact, Peter lives just down the hill from us here,
Really?
so he probably hear me. No, but and I said, wow. I said, that sounds pretty cool. And he said, Howard said, I said, look, Richard and Tanya are coming over in a couple weeks, and they know of you, and they know your painting skills and things like that, and makeup, and they really want to meet you and see if you might be interested in going out there. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. He said, so in a couple weeks, bring your portfolio. This is back in the days when we had our the big portfolios and
Hmm.
stuff, and carry them around. And so the day came that I met Richard and Tanya, and it was just one of those things where they were just beautiful people, really super nice. They talked funny, but they were really nice, and we just hit it off. And they says, look, we would love to bring you out. to train up our crew on your painting skills and makeup stuff like that, and anything else you have. And would you be interested in coming out for for a little while? And at the time, I felt really at home in LA. I made it my home. I was very happy. I had a great place and everything. And it's like, think about it. And he said, okay. And he said, well, you can just come out for 3 months, to see what you think, and see how you like working with us and how we like working with you. And if it doesn't work out, well, then you had a free trip to New Zealand.
Sure.
And I said, yeah, sure. So we kept in touch, and it was after that, I went to go work with Patrick Tatopoulos on Independence Day. Oh, no, sorry. Was it Independence Day? No, on Godzilla. It was on Godzilla. And by this time, it was 1997, I think it was, something like that. And so I worked with Patrick on that, and a lot of time had gone by. And then Richard called me one time. He said, look, we got some really sad news, but the studios have decided to pull the plug on Godzilla, is because you guys are doing Godzilla. And at this time, Rick Baker was doing Mighty Joe Young.
Right.
And then they said, studios don't want another giant, creature rampaging around the town. So, and Richard said, he says, but we've got another project we want to bring you out for. And of course it was Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
And so and I'm pretty sure that I was towards the tail end of Godzilla that I went out to New Zealand for just a few weeks and stuff, just to kind of see what they were doing and everything. And I'll never forget, Richard picked me up from this little tiny airport here in Wellington, and and drove me around town, and we went to the Weta workshop. And by this time, I think they had been working on the film designing for a few months now. And Richard said, we've got some great artists here. We have Alan Lee and John Howe. And it's like, what? You got Alan Lee and John Howe are here? And so I got to meet those guys. It was unbelievable. And I saw the designs and the maquettes that all the guys were doing and making, and the designs were just so fresh and different, so different from anything that I've seen before. Whereas before, like being in LA, if I saw a film and didn't know who did it, I could see the stuff. I said, oh, that's Stan Winston, or that's Rick Baker, because each shop kind of puts their stamp on it, and you can kind of tell. But in this case, this stuff was so different and so fresh and new. It was exciting for me to be able to design paint schemes for these characters and creatures. And but I think the reason why everything looks so fresh and different is because they were so far away from the Hollywood scene. And not even getting the magazines and all that kind of stuff. So they had to kind of come up with their own stuff, which is just really, really fascinating.
One of the things those films really do well, I think, is they feel cohesive. They feel like, okay, you've got the separate worlds of, the orcs, and you've got the hobbits and everything else, but it feels like a universe. It feels like that world building is really good. And I wonder if that's something to do with all of you just being in that same place, working under the same umbrella.
Absolutely. And that was one of the amazing things that I really, when I found out, when Richard first took me to the workshop, and went all around and saw the stuff that the guys were doing. So I asked Richard again. I said, so what are you guys actually building? What are you going to be doing? He says, well, we're doing the miniatures, which they call bigatures because they were so huge, and we're doing the armor and weapons. And we're doing the prosthetics, the makeup stuff, and we're doing costumes and the visual effects. And I said, you guys are doing all that? And he goes, yeah. And I said, I was like, you're insane. And at first I thought they're never going to pull this off, because what would have happened if Lord of the Rings had gone to Hollywood? Rick Baker would have got the makeup. Stan Winston's would have got some of the animatronic stuff. Another company would have got this. But then again, as I said, each company kind of puts their stamp on it, even though they're following the same kind of designs and everything. That's why a lot of times when I see a film, all the stuff never quite seems to meld together, because it comes from different companies and stuff, and just doesn't quite fit. But that was the key thing, and I think really one of the big successes of Lord of the Rings is because it was all done under one roof, and just had basically one direction, which was Peter.
Yeah.
So
yeah, a genius. It just amazes me that he was able to pull all of these people together and kind of manage that and make those movies. They still mean a lot to me and my family, those movies. We've watched all of the special editions, all of the behind the scenes stuff. There's like, I think you can spend a day just watching behind the
Oh,
scenes stuff.
easily, easily. I love it. I still watch it. I go on YouTube, while I'm working, and I'll
Yeah,
just come across something and watch it, and just it's almost brings a tear to my eye because it just it takes me back to that time
yeah.
when we were filming some of that stuff, and it was just so incredible. It's like it's and sadly something like that just won't happen again. You know.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I work on small TV projects, and I might work with people for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you create that family environment, don't you? You have relationships with people, and sometimes you leave that and you might never see those people again. That must have been quite difficult with Lord of the Rings, kind of knowing it was over, and trying to find the next challenge, I guess.
Yeah. It was interesting because it was over three times.
Yeah.
After each film and stuff like that, everybody said their goodbyes, and they said, but we all knew, I said, well, we'll see you next year, or we'll see you in 8 months or whatever. And it wasn't until, the very last of the times that we were all going to be together.
Mm.
That was really, really tough to say goodbye to everybody because we had been together for, uh, I think we filmed for what, 3 years or something like
Mm.
that, or it was something crazy like that. And we got to be such great friends and everything. And luckily I still keep in touch with so many people of the cast and crew, which is really cool. And one of them, of course, is John Rhys Davies, who lives here in New Zealand now.
Right, does he? I didn't
And
realize. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, spends his time between here and Isle of Man.
Uh-huh.
But we always keep in touch, and he became kind of like a second dad, just
Nice.
even though he hated what I did to him. And my friend Dominique Till, who's a brilliant makeup artist, we would torture John and put him into that makeup over and over again.
Yeah, he seems like a fun guy, John. I've seen him interviewed a bunch of times, and he always comes across well. Big character.
Very big, bigger than life. We used to joke and do lines from Indiana Jones, and so I try to imitate him. I go, you know, Indy, why does the floor move? And John would go put his hand on my shoulder and go, no, 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 son, it was Indy. Why does the floor? I said, no, no, no. He said, don't tell me what to do. I did it.
That is a very good impression. Like, you just totally changed your voice there. That was very good. So, thinking about Lord of the Rings, then you've got Gollum there, you've got Andy Serkis, and you've got all of that motion capture, and one of the first kind of fully realized, fully CG characters. How did you then make the transition from the physical work that you're doing to being this textures expert in the CG world?
I don't know about textures expert, but anyways, but what had happened was I was still at workshop, and we had just finished making the dead body of Boromir, by the actor Sean Bean, and we did this really cool body of him, and where he's laying down. This is when in the scene where they put him in the boat and they send him over the falls, and it was Joe Lettieri, who runs Weta Digital, had just happened to come through the shop and just take a look at all the stuff we were doing. And Weta Digital and Weta Workshop are literally two buildings back to back. So Joe would come over, quite often. And we had the Boromir body on the floor and stuff, and we were, attaching the hands together where he's holding the sword up to his chest. And Joe goes, "Wow, that looks really cool, guys." I said, "Shit, that skin looks so real." I said, "It's so translucent." I said, "He looks like a real guy." And and I said, "Oh, thanks, thanks." It's and Joe asked, I said, "So, well, tell me your process. How do you get the skin and the veins and the freckles and all that stuff?" And I explained to him. I said, "Well, it starts out with the base material, which is a silicone material, which is obviously very translucent like our skin, and it's tinted a certain way so that it's not too translucent because we don't want it to look like a wax figure, and not too opaque because then it might as well just be a latex mask. So it's finding that right kind of balance. And I told my process is as I airbrush all the colors and everything on there, and I build up probably 10 to 12 different layers of everything from the freckles to the veins to the capillaries and all that kind of stuff. And he goes, "Wow, that's really fascinating." I said, "Whatever you're doing, it works really well." And I had painted this little bust of Gollum, a little silicone bust sculpted by Jamie Bezwark at workshop. And I had painted three of these little busts, and they were all different skin tones because and they were to be shown to Peter and Fran for them to figure out what color Gollum was going to be. And so I painted one that they had finally picked and approved. And Joe said, he says, well, you know that bust of Gollum that you painted? I said, yeah. I says, well, we've got that over there, and the texture painters are looking at it, and they're scratching their heads because they can't quite figure out how you painted it, and we're able to get all those colors and the layering and the depth in your painting. I said, but what you just explained to me makes total sense. And so a little light bulb came on in his head, and he says, how would you like to learn some texture painting? And I looked at Joe and I said, well, does it involve a computer? He goes, yeah. And I said, no. I said, thanks, and no thanks. I'll stick with my airbrush, Joe. And he says, oh, come on, give it a try. I said, Joe, I said, look, I'm technically challenged. I said, I struggle with my email. Okay. And he says, look, we'll come over. You don't even have to come to us. We'll come set up a computer in your office, and we'll even send the texture artist to come over and teach you the basics and stuff. And then maybe in trade, what you can do is that you can show him how to practically airbrush. And it was like, oh, I don't know. And it was Richard Taylor. It was his fault because Richard was there, and he goes, oh, come on, mate, try it. And it's like, oh, all right. So they came and set up all this stuff in my office, and this gentleman came in, a Russian guy. His name is Sergei Neshubov, who's a brilliant texture artist, and he's still there at Weta. And so he taught me a lot of the basics on how to texture paint, and in trade I did teach him how to do some airbrushing. But that was how it all kind of started, and then I ended up painting Gollum digitally with Sergey, and used my techniques and stuff of the same way that I just pretended like this 3D head that I could turn in the computer. I just treated it like as if it was a silicone head, and I painted all my layers, and all my mottling and freckles and veins and all that kind of stuff. And then, from what I understood, once I finished painting it, it was going to go to another department called the shaders. And the shaders were these magicians that could make that skin look really translucent or dry or wet or anything like that. And so they got what I did, and they did some tests, and it looked really, really cool, and everybody was just blown away by it and loved it. And so that was kind of my start into the CG stuff, because I started to kind of like it. I thought, this is kind of cool, because I had never run out of paint. I said, the only thing I'm missing all the toxic fumes,
Yeah.
um, and I think it was Joe Lettieri said, he says, look, we really don't have anybody with us who's really like a creature art director, per se. And so I started kind of being the liaison between Weta Workshop and Weta Digital, spending my time back and forth until I became more and more involved with Weta Digital, until I finally was over there full time. And I looked after the textures department for about 7 years, looked after, as many as like 60 artists, texture artists, and working on all sorts of different shows. And I'm still there today. And I work in the art department.
And 3 months
And
turned into how many years now?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've been out here in New Zealand for about 24 years now. So I think it's been about half time at Weta Workshop and half time at Weta Digital. And I still jump back and forth. I still go back to workshop, because I love the tangible stuff about that. The practicality of pushing around some clay and doing makeup and that kind of stuff. So I love that. But of course, I love all the new gadgets, that the digital world has to offer. ZBrush and Photoshop and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm. I mean, doing your job, you obviously have, you've clearly moved, as you described, you've moved with the times here. How much of your kind of attention is focused on what your competitors are doing? I mean, obviously, I think of Industrial Light and Magic being the other big effects house. Are you kind of keeping a close eye on what they're doing over there?
I guess I probably do, just from going out and watching the movies, and seeing what's out there and seeing what really cool effects are out there. And I think that's the thing is, working in the film industry or even being, some sort of an artist and watching a film. And if I see a makeup in it and the makeup looks great, I know how hard it was to make it look that good, and even times when it may not look great, or if there's an edge or something, I never point the finger, because you never know the backstory on it. They could have, had the makeup ready first thing in the morning. Then of course they end up shooting it at 5 o'clock at night. And by this time, he's eating spaghetti for lunch, and it's just a nightmare. But I guess, just looking at the trade magazines but watching the movies and stuff, and just seeing what other people have done out there and the other companies and stuff.
As a sort of last question then, Gino, a lot of people I've spoken to have always talk about the kind of drive you have, the passion you have to have to be not only enter into the film industry but to last in the film industry. What do you think is the kind of next big challenge in your arena? And also, do you ever take a moment to kind of look back and appreciate, apart from talking to some fool like me, to appreciate what you've done in the industry and, have a look back at all of that kind of legacy work that's in place there?
Well, I think for me, I think that the biggest kick that I get is when I get somebody who's younger than me, obviously, and said he says, "Oh, you really inspired me," and it makes me feel really old. But at the same time, I said, "Oh, that's really nice." I just had lunch with somebody today that a friend of mine introduced me to, and he says, "I've been such a huge fan of your work, ever since for the longest time." And I thought, wow, that's really cool to hear. And the other thing that I love to do is obviously to give back, and so as I said, I do a lot of talks to schools and students and things, and try to help out upcoming artists as much as I can, to give them feedback, or to send them materials, or to lend them some of my books and things like that, and just to have them send their work back to me so I can critique it and give them some creative feedback and stuff. So I think that's a pretty at my stage in life at the moment. I think that's one of the really cool things.
Yeah, being able to pass on what you've learned. It's a bit of a
Yeah,
Yoda
yeah,
line, that one, isn't it? And what is the next
exactly.
big challenge for you then in your part of the industry? Where are we looking to now? What's on the horizon?
Well, as far as the technology and stuff, I mean the stuff that's out there is really interesting. There's something out there that I've just come across recently. I'm gonna forget the name of it now. Um, Maybe you'll remember it too, but it's something, it's a program that's out there. It's like an AI program where you can type in words like Salvador Dali and the Grand Canyon and something, and it puts these images together, and it's
Yeah,
just
I
like
saw
it's
this just the other
mind-boggling.
day. Like, there's a few
Okay, yeah.
websites where you can do it. You can just type in anything and it will make this artwork. Yeah.
And it's just really incredible stuff, especially creatures and stuff. It's almost like it's like how the I could have never come up with that,
Mm.
which bothers me. It's like, damn, why couldn't I come up with that? This stupid computer has done it. But to be honest, the thing that bothers me a bit about it is like I think we're going to have a whole kind of slew of a new breed of artists out there that do this stuff, and they're going to have these gallery showings of the stuff out there. They're going to sign their name to it. It says, "I'm the artist. I created that." I said, "Well, not really." I said, "You really didn't do that. It's I don't exactly know how the whole thing works, but from what I understand is that it just takes pictures, which are most likely other people's pictures, and combines them into creating these new things. So it's pretty amazing. I think it's definitely could definitely be a really good strong tool for us who do a lot of concept artwork to be able to throw something together and see what it comes up with. But I think as far as like being a real artist, being able to put together your own artwork and stuff together and see what it comes up with, melds them together,
Yeah,
and so
interesting.
that would be pretty interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's like all of these tools, isn't it? I guess if you lean on them too much, you're kind of losing a bit of your artistry potentially. You've still got to have those fundamental skills. I mean, I spoke to Nilo Rodis Jamira, who's one of the designers on The Empire Strikes Back, an industrial designer, and he
yeah.
said, he designed like the ATSTs and the Tauntauns with Phil Tippett and stuff like that, and he said, one of the pieces of advice he always gives people, because he, like you, kind of mentors and teaches as well. He said, just get a blank piece of paper.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
just do it, because that overwhelming emptiness is the thing you need to overcome. Um,
Absolutely. And that's the one thing that I always say to and that my talks and things is like, not everybody here in this classroom can afford a computer, or afford an iPad or things like that. But I'm pretty sure that everybody in here can afford a pencil and a piece of paper. I said, there's nothing wrong with that stuff. I said, and it'll help you train your eye and your hand to be able to look at something and to reproduce it, and having those skills will help you in the with things like with Photoshop and things like that. It's just a tool, because you could sketch something out, scan it, take it into Photoshop, and use it as another tool, take it to another level. And even from the designers or whatever it is to take it into a 3D program like ZBrush, which is an incredible tool, which I love and I'm still learning. But to turn something into a 3-dimensional thing, and then you can even have it printed now,
Yeah.
which is really just mind-boggling. The stuff that can be done.
Mm.
It's pretty incredible.
So where do we next see your work? Do you know, where are we going to find it next? Where can we look out for it?
The stuff we've been doing, we've done a bit of Netflix stuff. So the recent Umbrella Academy is out, which we did the stuff on that, which is pretty. It's been a lot of fun, to work on that stuff. Then of course, we've got Avatar, which is looking amazing, and I can't wait to see that, all together. So I know everybody's been waiting a long time for it, but it's going to be worth the wait.
Yeah, I think before we started recording, we were just talking briefly, and I said that James Cameron always manages to, he might go away and beaver away at something for a long time, but he always manages to capture people's imagination. I think we both, you mentioned about seeing Titanic. I think I don't want to see that movie, and then you
no, exactly.
Go, oh, wow.
I did want to see it, yeah. And then when I saw it, it was just like, oh my God, I was bawling my eyes out.
Well, that's the magic of the movies. Thanks, Gino. Thanks for your time, and it's been really nice to chat to you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Take care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat there with Gino Acevedo. Such a nice guy. I hope you agree. Enthusiastic, warm. And it's so great to talk to people who are fans like us and fans of the kind of films they work on. Thanks to Gino for his time and for his passion and enthusiasm. Next up on the podcast, I've had the distinct pleasure just this morning, a couple of hours ago, to chat with comedy writer and props collector David Mandel. You might know David's name from Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Veep, maybe The Dictator, one of the films he was involved with, or from his recent podcast with House of Dragons showrunner Ryan Condal, The Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, about prop collecting. I was joined by former podcast guest and now friend, we can say friends now, can't we, matte painter Jim Maxwell. Jim not only worked on Curb Your Enthusiasm, but he, like David and myself, is also a great admirer of Ralph McQuarrie. David, of course, co-wrote a wonderful and very heavy book all about Ralph McQuarrie and his artwork. So that will be up by the end of the month. I'm squeezing in these August episodes before the month is out. And then next up will be ex-Lucasfilm producer Jim Bloom. Jim and I had a pre-interview chat last week, and we kind of hit it off, actually. We ended up talking for about 45 minutes. He's a lovely guy, and I'm really looking forward to recording that in the next week or so. Thanks again for your support. Please share with your like-minded film-loving friends and colleagues, even enemies. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast. And a final thanks to Michael Hewitt-Brown of MB Music, embemusic.co.uk. He did the music for this podcast. You might have heard some of the new little jingles in there, either side of the adverts. So thanks to Mike. And if you want to work with him, give him a shout on embemusic.co.uk.